Well, it's official. The Marvels has turned in the worst box office opening performance of any title in the Marvel Cinematic Universe history. And if you've been watching this channel for some time, this should come as no surprise to you. In fact, the only people I think genuinely surprised by this are the most ardent Marvel stans out there, or at least maybe the biggest Disney apologists out there. But let's put some numbers to it before we have a brief discussion ahead of today's live show right here on Valiant Renegade at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll leave a link to that live show in the description of this video below. Domestic box office tracking in at around $47 million. I think that number could easily come in a bit lower because this movie has been trending down since pre-sales began about a month ago. If you recall back then, they were projecting 50 to 75 million. Places like Variety and Deadline pushing that even higher. They were seeing in the $80 million range. And leading into this weekend, I was thinking probably about $45 million after we saw that 6.6 million in Thursday night previews that we did a video on a couple of days ago. But put this into perspective. With a $110 million global opening weekend, that's almost the same exact amount that Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania did about 8 months ago in North America alone. And from Nancy Tartaglione at Deadline Magazine, who covers the international box office, she was just as surprised with the international numbers because that 63 million was initially projected just a few days ago coming into the weekend to settle out somewhere around $80 million. That's a big drop. We're talking about a 20% miss on those estimates coming in just Friday. China, as expected, came in really low, and it's curious that there's still no Maoyan audience score, but the Douban critics' thrashing is clearly not helping. Nevertheless, the market was tops for the Marvels with 11.7 million for the launch, followed by the UK at 4.3 million, Indonesia at 3.7 million, Korea at 3.5, and France 3.1. Now think about that for a second. With China at 11.7 million, it obviously represented the largest international market for this film, but most of the titles that have been released in Marvel Phases 4 and 5 did not get to make it into China. So think about their opening weekends. Again, with the exception of Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, they did get access back to China and then retroactively gave access to Wakanda Forever, but that didn't count on its opening weekend. This opening weekend, when you adjust China out, was under $100 million globally, about 98 to 99 million global open without that country. When you match that up to the rest of these films in the past 2 years, you're starting to see how truly bad this performance is. And then on the domestic front, we've got Anthony D'Alessandro. The Marvels melt down. Disney MCU posts lowest box office opening ever domestically at $47 million. What went wrong? Well, you can start with the fact they greenlit this film and then went into pre-production and then pretty much just rolled downhill from there. With the final Sunday update, the last-minute push for the Marvels, with an appearance by star Brie Larson on Friday's The Tonight Show and at a theater in New York City post-actor strike, have not moved weekend grosses any higher for Marvel Studios' The Marvels. The film is posting a 3-day at the bottom of yesterday's estimates with 47 million, the lowest ever for Disney's Marvel Cinematic Universe. Don't blame the runtime as the Marvel clocks in at 97 minutes versus other MCU picks, which have runtimes over 2.5 hours. The Marvel's Saturday was 15.3 million, a 30% drop against previews and a total Friday of 21.5. In regards to U.S. admissions, the Marvels came in, as per intelligence, at 3.3 million tickets compared to other superhero bombs with The Flash at 3.9 million and Eternals at 5.5 million. Yeah, The Eternals, one of the worst performing, worst received Marvel films ever made, drew in 5.5 million tickets in its opening weekend, and that was back in 2021 when theaters were just coming out of the lockdowns. Remember, the only movie really before that that got a full theatrical release, or at least an exclusive one, was Shang-Chi a couple of months earlier. The Marvels only managed to pull in 3.3 million butts-in seats in the U.S. compared to the 5.5, over 2 million fewer tickets. But this problem is bleeding out beyond the typical Hollywood trades. When Wall Street publications and financial and business publications start taking notice, it really becomes a problem. We're already seeing headlines like this from Bloomberg. The Marvels melts down at the box office, marking a new low for the MCU. Or how about from CNBC? The Marvels has the worst opening weekend ever for any MCU film at $47 million. And look at the final bullet point that CNBC wrote. And they're correct. Disney and Marvel Studios have struggled to reconnect with audiences in the post-Endgame era. They also have a list here from ComScore showing the worst of the worst openings, with the Marvels at $47 million, The Incredible Hulk in 2008 at $55.4 million. Now, we talked about last time if you actually adjusted the average ticket price from back then up to what the average ticket price is today for, say, the Marvels, which is in North America with these domestic figures, it's closing in around $14 per ticket. The Incredible Hulk actually would have had closer to a $100 million opening weekend. Ant-Man from 2015, again, we're talking about ticket prices from 8 years ago, and you're adding in a lot of really rapid inflation just in the last year and a half alone. Captain America, the First Avenger, Thor, and the Eternals. Now, with the exception of the Eternals, all of these prices, if they were properly inflated up by ticket price inflation, not the CPI, would have much higher openings in today's dollars. This isn't superhero fatigue. It's just bad movie fatigue. And as I've stated many, many times in recent videos and live shows, if Disney had simply paid attention to actual fan interest, to things like merchandise sales for the Brie Larson character of Captain Marvel back in 2019, instead of artificially inflated ticket sales thanks to being sandwiched in between Infinity War and Endgame, two of the biggest films in theaters of all time, they would have had a better idea of what to do with this film, or more importantly, probably not to do this film at all. And why? Let's remind folks what they've done with this film. Apart from shooting it once, reshooting it, and then maybe even multiple reshoots in there, even the numbers has updated their figures to reflect some of the research that has been done at places like Forbes magazine and Caroline Reed. Take a look here. Production budget stating at $274.8 million. And I have a feeling that's not all of it, because there have been a lot of reshoots this year that would not show up in the financial reporting until likely next year. And of course, that doesn't even include what they spent to market this thing. We're talking about a film that probably has somewhere in the neighborhood of $400 million all in costs by the Walt Disney Company. It needs to get to around $800 million globally to think about breaking even. And this movie is likely to finish its run at around $200 to $250 million, which is about what Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania did in its first 3 days of its opening weekend. But we'll talk more about that this afternoon at the Sunday Live Show, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Make sure you set your notifications for that. We've got a lot to cover, not only with the Marvels, but also the end of the SAG-AFTRA strike, but also a post-game wrap-up on the Disney earnings call that we covered earlier this week. Hope to see you there. Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.